Before we begin, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next scary story. Now, turn down the lights, put on your headphones, and listen carefully, because this story might make you think twice before opening your door at night. At exactly 2:13 in the morning, Michael opened his front door to a stranger. 7 days later, Michael disappeared. The police found his house completely empty. No blood, no signs of a struggle, nothing, except for one photograph sitting on the kitchen table. It showed Michael standing beside the stranger he had allowed into his home. But there was something impossible about the photograph. Michael looked almost 70 years old, and on the back of the photograph were 5 words. The guest always needs a host. But who was this stranger? Why hadn't he aged? And what happened to Michael? To understand that, we have to go back to the night it all began. It was a cold Friday night. Rain hammered against the windows of Michael's old family home, while the wind howled through the trees outside. Michael sat alone in the living room watching television. He had lived in the house for most of his life. It had belonged to his family for generations. But there was one part of the house Michael had always avoided. Upstairs, at the end of the hallway, was a small locked room. His mother had kept it locked for as long as he could remember. Whenever Michael asked what was inside, she always gave him the same answer. Some doors are better left closed. Michael never understood what she meant. His mother had died 20 years earlier, and after her death, Michael simply stopped asking questions. Until that night. The clock on the wall reached 2:13 a.m. Then came a knock. Michael looked toward the front door. He waited. Nothing. Then came 2 more knocks. Someone was outside. Michael slowly stood. Who is it? For several seconds, there was no answer. He walked toward the door and looked through the glass. A man was standing on the porch. He was wearing a long black coat. His clothes were soaked from the rain. His face was pale. And strangely, he wasn't carrying an umbrella. Michael's instincts told him not to open the door. Then the stranger suddenly collapsed against the porch. Michael panicked. He unlocked the door. Hey, are you okay? The man slowly lifted his head. Their eyes met, and the stranger smiled. Thank you. Michael helped him inside. My name is Thomas, the stranger said. Michael. Thomas nodded. It's a pleasure to meet you. Michael handed him a towel. You can stay here tonight. The storm is too bad to travel in. Thomas looked around the house. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he smiled. Yes, I think I'll stay. Michael showed Thomas the spare bedroom. You can sleep here. Before leaving, Michael pointed across the hallway. The bathroom is there. If you need anything, just call me. Good night, Michael. Good night. Michael closed the door. He walked a few steps toward his bedroom. Then something made him stop. He looked back. Thomas was standing in the doorway, just watching him. Michael gave an awkward smile. Everything okay? Thomas didn't answer. He simply closed the door. Michael went to bed. But something about Thomas bothered him. He couldn't explain what it was. Maybe it was the man's eyes, or the way he had looked around the house. Almost as if he already knew it. Michael eventually fell asleep. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., his eyes opened. Someone was walking in the hallway. Step, step, step. Michael sat up. The footsteps stopped. He slowly opened his bedroom door. The hallway was dark. Nobody was there. Then he noticed something on the floor.
Wet footprints.
They started at the spare bedroom and led directly to his bedroom door. Michael stared at them. His heart began pounding. Thomas. No answer. He walked toward the spare bedroom. The door was slightly open. Michael pushed it open. The bed was empty. He checked the bathroom. Nothing. Then he heard breathing behind him. Michael slowly turned around. Thomas was standing in the hallway. Michael jumped. Jesus. You scared me. I'm sorry, Thomas said. Michael pointed toward the floor. Were you walking around? Thomas looked down at the footprints, then back at Michael. I've been asleep all night. Michael stared at him. Thomas smiled. Good night. Michael didn't sleep again. The next morning, Thomas was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Michael watched him carefully. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well." Michael nodded, but he couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. Later that afternoon, Thomas left the house. "I need some fresh air." As soon as he disappeared down the road, Michael went upstairs. He entered the spare bedroom. Thomas had left an old suitcase beside the bed. Michael stared at it. He knew opening it was wrong, but something inside him told him he needed to know who this man really was. He opened the suitcase. Inside were clothes, an old book, and several photographs. Michael picked up the first photograph. His blood ran cold. It was a picture of his house, but the photograph looked decades old. He picked up another. A young woman stood outside the house. Michael immediately recognized her. His mother. His hands began to shake. Why did Thomas have a photograph of his mother? Then he found another photograph. Thomas was standing beside her. Michael stared at his face. Something was wrong. The photograph looked 40 years old. But Thomas looked exactly the same. Same face, same hair, same black coat. Michael turned the photograph over, for words had been written on the back. "He must never return." Michael dropped it. Then he heard the front door open. Thomas was home. Michael quickly put everything back. He ran downstairs. Thomas was standing in the hallway. He smiled. "Looking for something?" Michael swallowed.
No.
Thomas stared at him. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Then Thomas smiled again. "Good." That night, Michael couldn't sleep. At midnight, he went downstairs for water. Thomas was sitting alone in the living room. The television was off. The room was completely dark. Michael froze. "Why are you sitting here?" Thomas slowly looked at him. "I could ask you the same question." Michael stepped closer. "I found the photographs." Thomas didn't react. "You knew my mother?" "Yes." "How?" "Your mother and I were friends." "When?" Thomas smiled. "Many years ago." "How many?" Thomas looked directly at him. 40. Michael felt his stomach drop. "That isn't possible." "Why?" "Because you haven't aged." Silence. Thomas slowly stood. "You're very observant." Michael stepped backward. "What happened to my mother?" Thomas's smile disappeared. "She discovered the truth." "What truth?" Thomas moved closer. "She discovered what I really am." Suddenly, something slammed upstairs. Michael jumped. Thomas didn't move. He simply smiled. "What was that?" Michael asked. Thomas looked toward the ceiling. "She's awake." Michael's face went pale. "Who?" Thomas looked directly at him. "Your mother." Michael ran upstairs. Thomas followed. At the end of the hallway stood the locked door. The door shook again. Michael stared at it. His mother had kept that room locked his entire childhood. Thomas reached into his coat. He pulled out a small key. Michael stared at it. "Where did you get that?" Thomas smiled. "Your mother gave it to me." Michael hesitated. Then he inserted the key. The lock clicked. The door opened. Inside, the room was covered in photographs. Photographs of Michael. Photographs of his mother. Photographs of Thomas. There were dozens of them. Michael walked closer. Then he noticed something terrifying. Thomas looked exactly the same in every photograph. And finally, Michael slowly turned toward Thomas. "You're not human." Thomas smiled.
No.
"What are you?" Thomas stepped into the room. "I've had many names." "What do you want?" Thomas looked at him. "Your family has something I need." "What?" "You'll find out." Then a woman's voice whispered from the corner. "Michael." Michael froze. He knew that voice. "Mom." Thomas smiled. "She tried to stop me." Michael looked around. "Where is she?" Thomas pointed toward an old mirror. Michael looked into it. At first, he saw himself. Then the reflection changed. His mother appeared behind him. Her face was terrified. She whispered, "Don't trust him." Michael spun around. Nobody was there. He looked back at the mirror. His mother was gone. Michael turned toward Thomas. "What did you do to her?" Thomas's face became cold. She invited me into this house. Michael stared at him. Why? She thought I was a man who needed help. Michael's heart sank. The same way I did. Thomas smiled. Exactly. Suddenly everything made sense. His mother had made the same mistake. She had opened the door. She had invited Thomas inside. And somehow, he had never left. Michael ran toward the door, but it slammed shut. He grabbed the handle. Locked. Thomas slowly walked toward him. There is something you need to understand. Michael turned. What? Thomas whispered. I cannot enter a home unless someone invites me. Michael stared at him. But I invited you. Thomas smiled. Yes. He stepped closer. And now, you belong to me. Michael screamed. The lights went out. The next morning, the villagers noticed something strange. Michael's house was completely silent. Nobody answered the door. The windows were locked. The front door was wide open. But Michael was gone. There was no blood.
No struggle.
No sign of Thomas. The police searched the entire house. Nothing. Then one officer found a photograph sitting on the kitchen table. It showed Thomas standing outside the house. Beside him was Michael. But Michael looked almost 70 years old. His hair was gray. His face was covered in wrinkles. And his eyes were completely empty. The officer turned the photograph over. 5 words were written on the back. The guest always needs a host. The police thought it was some kind of strange joke. Until 1 week later, another family moved into the house. A young couple and their little daughter. They knew nothing about Michael, nothing about Thomas, and nothing about the locked room upstairs. That night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., someone knocked on the door. The husband woke up. Then came 2 more knocks. His wife called from the bedroom. Who's there? The husband walked downstairs. He looked through the window. A man stood outside in the rain. A long black coat, pale face, and a strange smile. The man looked directly at him. Please, I need somewhere to stay. The husband reached for the lock. Then he heard a whisper behind him. Don't open the door. He froze. Slowly he turned around. Nobody was there. He looked back through the window. The stranger was still smiling. Then the stranger spoke. But this time his voice was different. It was the voice of Michael. Please let me in. The husband stepped away from the door. His face went pale. The stranger raised his hand and knocked again, 3 times. The lights inside the house began flickering. The little girl appeared at the top of the stairs. She looked toward the front door. Daddy! The husband turned. What? The girl pointed behind him. There's a man standing behind you. The husband slowly turned around. Thomas was standing in the hallway, smiling, but the front door was still locked. The husband looked toward the window. The stranger was still outside. Then he looked back. Thomas was still inside. 2 identical faces. 2 identical black coats. 2 identical smiles. The husband screamed. The next morning, the house was empty. The family had disappeared. The police searched everywhere. Again, they found nothing, except for a photograph. It was sitting on the kitchen table. The photograph showed Thomas standing in front of the house. Beside him stood Michael. Beside Michael stood the young husband. And beside the husband stood the little girl. All of them looked much older. All of them were staring directly at the camera. The officer slowly turned the photograph over. 6 words were written on the back. There is always room for one more. And somewhere in the darkness, a door slowly opened. Then came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. So if you're ever alone at night, and someone knocks on your door, don't assume they need help. Don't assume they're lost. And whatever you do, don't invite them inside. Because some guests don't come to stay for one night. They come to take your place. And once you let them in, you may never leave. And if you hear 3 knocks tonight, whatever you do, don't answer. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more terrifying stories. And remember, never open your door to a stranger after midnight. You never know what might be waiting on the other side.